I am restoring a vintage chair that I found in a thrift store. And I'm filming this intro outside, not on the chair that I restored, because in true me fashion, none of this intro makes any sense with the rest of the video. I've been splitting up little baby plants from their mother plants in my garden, and you know, the stress of splitting families up has brought me to needing to sit outside in the sun. It's a beautiful day for wrecking families. I found this chair a couple of months ago and started the restoration process a couple of weeks after I purchased it. It was in between different projects such as making a rhinestone heart, painting my office, and restoring an antique clock that I still haven't fully restored because I am not a horologist. The cool thing about this chair is that it started a little bit of a passion, which is in researching and attempting to date the antique and vintage pieces that I find during all of my various junkyard endeavors. The reason that I have started doing this is because it's just really cool to learn the history of the things that you are trying to figure out. There are a couple of sketch marks which could have either been from the person who originally made it or from someone doing a restoration project at some time. It looked like someone had also hand cut the joins for the arms of the chair. When I was researching how to date antique chairs and furniture, one of the interesting things that I came across was that if pieces look a little bit uneven that should be even, that is often a sign that the piece was handmade instead of milled, and that can mean that the chair is actually a lot older than you might think. Now, because I'm not an expert at any of this, I wasn't really able to date this chair adequately, but my guess is that it's probably from the 1920s or later. I doubt that it is older than that, purely based on the fact that a lot of the parts of it look like they're milled, and a lot of the decorative parts look like they were made individually and overlaid. I have this really cool Victorian dresser in my office, and it looks like a lot of the decorative pieces on that were actually like carved in by hand, and they're a little bit uneven as a result, and there's also some really interesting texture behind them as a result of that. And I don't think that this chair shares that. In fact, the beaded parts on the back of the chair look like they were laid over the original wood. Anyway, all of that to say is I have no idea how old this chair was, but I do believe that it is one of two chairs from a dining set in probably the 1920s or later mid-century. The first part of restoring this chair was to take the seat cushion out and to begin recovering it. It had been sitting in a junkyard for a really long time, and before that, probably someone's shed. There were little bits of paint splashed all over the wood was incredibly dry, the velvet on the chair seat was super dusty, and interestingly so sun-faded that you couldn't actually see that original chartreuse colour. It had turned to this yellowy, kind of yucky colour. So I began by slowly and carefully taking the original velvet off and seeing what I needed to replace underneath. I used a flathead screwdriver to carefully pull off all of these kind of rusted nails. When I had fully pulled all of the old velvet off, I carefully stapled in a little bit of the foam to make sure that it wouldn't move around while I was working. And then I carefully laid off the new velvet that I'd chosen, which was this fern printed silver velvet that matches the pelmet in my bedroom, and I began stapling that back on. This was an incredibly simple process. It was really just a matter of pulling the velvet to ensure that there were no wrinkles and the folds were all neat and going in the same direction. The more tedious part of this project was sanding off the old veneer and trying to get it to a point where I could put a new stain on, where all of the old damage would no longer show through. I used a detail sander and a few different grits of sandpaper, but mostly a very fine grit, and I just kept working, turning the chair over, turning it around, and getting in all of the tiny little cracks until I had gotten enough of the original veneer off that I felt confident going in with a new stain. I also would rip down my sandpaper into really tiny pieces and just use teeny tiny little scraps of sandpaper to get into the more tedious parts of the chair. My goal was to preserve all of the wonderful detail and even leave a little bit of the old stain in some of the darker crevices so that I could build up an interesting gradient. The wood that this chair's legs and frame was made out of was actually really interesting. I have no idea what it is, but it has this beautiful grain that almost looks like a tiger stripe. This was the most difficult and time-consuming part of the whole project. It took me several days to remove as much of this veneer as I could without wrecking any of the details. Once I was satisfied and the only parts of the original veneer that were actually left were the parts that I wanted to keep to create that gradient, I put down some alfoil and decided to do some very, very dangerous indoor staining with a rag and some water-based stain. Also in one of my favorite sweaters, which I'm not sure if I've actually managed to recover this sweater. It's in the wash. Once I'd finished staining everything, I covered it with a couple of thin coats of linseed oil. The way that I do this is to use a fresh new rag and douse it with a little bit of linseed oil, let that initial coat rest for 24 hours, and then have the next coat put on and rest for 24 hours. You can see that I put the cushion on a little while it was still wet because I just couldn't wait. I wanted to see the finished product, but it's all fine and the cushion did not get stained. Hope you guys enjoyed me chatting about chairs or restoring chairs. I'm planning on doing a lot more vintage restoration on this channel, as well as making my own furniture pieces, gardening, baking, all the fun stuff that I love to do to be creative in my spare time, renovating this house. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. A youth just walked past me. That's so scary. Ugh, youths. Like the video, leave a comment, etc., all that good stuff. Don't comment on my lack of finesse when dyeing my own hair. I'll never be good at it.